One, two, three, four.
Hello, you're listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. We are a general interest independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. This year, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we've had to close our store and cancel in-person events. But Skylight is your neighborhood bookstore, and we are finding ways to create community even while we're far apart. In the coming weeks, we'll be putting out lots of new audio content to help you discover new books, connect with authors, and check in with your favorite booksellers. To learn more about how you can help keep Skylight alive, please visit our website at skylightbooks.com or check out our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
Hi, Amina.
Hi, Jessi.
Thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Of course. I can't wait. So
I guess we'll start by introducing ourselves. Okay. I'll go first. So I am Jezewska Stevens. I am the author of the exhibition of Persephone Q, which came out in March, just before we entered this pandemic. And I'm calling from Brooklyn, and I'm currently on my roof and looking out at, I can catch just a glimpse of the Manhattan skyline from here.
And I am Amina Cain. I'm the author of a novel called Indelicacy that came out in February, and a short story collection called Creature that's been out for a few years. I'm calling from Los Angeles. I'm in my house. I'm sitting in front of a large window that looks out onto some hills with a lot of houses on them. It's still light out. I guess it'll get dark in about another hour or so.
And what's the weather like out there, Amina?
It's been strangely chilly and rainy in the last almost month, I think. It got warm for a while and then it got chilly and rainy again. But I think we're in for some warm weather tomorrow.
Nice.
You guys had rain today also?
Yeah, big rainstorms. And it stopped just a few hours ago, and so the city has that fresh just after rain feelings. This is the first time I've been outside all day, so that feels nice.
Yeah, that sounds nice.
Yeah. So I guess I was going to do just a brief reading, and then Amina and I were going to chat a little bit about the book. So just a bit of background before I dive in. At the center of my novel is a photography exhibition that features the Manhattan skyline, which has been digitally manipulated. And the book is set in New York just after 9/11, when the skyline, of course, has been drastically altered right after the 9/11 attacks. And as I mentioned, I'm calling from my own roof where I can catch just a glimpse of the Manhattan skyline, which lately has also been altered because the Empire State Building, like tonight, is often lit up bright red and flashing like a siren in honor of COVID victims and all the essential workers who are on the front lines of our current crisis. So it gives the skyline a very eerie mood that echoes the book and maybe New York just after 9/11. So I'm going to read a very brief scene in which my narrator, Percy, finds herself a bit at the end of a rope and has also taken refuge on her roof. So, on those rare evenings when I am feeling truly low, when not even the library, Encarta, Napster, beauty blogs, the self-help author's website and message box, Asking Jeeves, or the AIM chat box, when not even the porn star or the scientist can affect some improvement in my mood, I take refuge on the roof. The roof will remind you that in the grander scheme of things, you are doing okay. So Misha always said. Our building was 7 stories tall, and it was true that from this vantage, the world was much improved. Outside, I breathed in the cool syrup of the night and felt my nausea calm. The laundry I had hung the day before floated on the line, laced with snow. Misha's sleeves tangled with mine. Bras lifted and fell like sighs. I caught one. The cups were half frozen and stiff. I released a sweater from its clothespins and pulled it over my head. It was my mother's, though I had been wearing it since I was young. Down below, Manhattan unfurled itself into 4 a.m. Traffic flowed through the avenues, soft and steady as waves. Misha had installed a lawn chair by the balustrade in the summer, and I reached between the plastic belts of the seat for the biscuit tin in which I kept a stash of cigarettes. Inside, a book of matches and 3 packs of Camel Lights. I had smoked sporadically for many years. What else is there to do on late night walks? But after Misha moved in, my cigarettes had begun to disappear. I'd counter-hid them in this tin. I looked into the shallow basin now, lit a Camel, then immediately tossed it into the street. Leaning over the balustrade, I watched it flutter to the ground. I reached for another. Luxury assorted, advised the biscuit lid. I was still at the cornice, trying not to smoke, when I heard someone at the hatch. The door swung slightly open. It was barely ajar. Then a woman slunk through the narrow gap. It was Claire from across the hall. Her eyes were swollen and sad and settled on me with a kind of quiet greed, as if finding me here, on the roof, might sate some kind of hunger. Her running tights shimmered with patterns, and over these she wore a loose cranberry sweater. She delicately cleared her throat. Could I have one of those? I offered her the tin. Have them all, I said. I'm trying to quit. Okay.
Thank you. That was so great. And I'm glad you were able to read it on your own roof.
Yeah.
Well, first, I just want to say congratulations. I think that the exhibition of Persephone Q is a really incredible book. And it made me think a lot about the possibilities just in the form of the novel. And the exact moment I knew how much I was going to like the book came pretty early on page 4. There's a passage there that I really love, and I was wondering if you would mind if I read it real quick out loud.
Sure.
Okay. Once, while we were walking along Central Park after dinner, a child stole my purse. I watched him dash away down the street, his small red cap tracing a lovely bouncing pattern along the gray stone of the boundary wall, like a paintbrush loaded with red paint. Misha threw up his arms in exasperation. What was I doing? Run. But I stood still and calmly stunned, watching the red cap fade. I was so taken with that image. It's really evocative and nice. But I think it also tells us something about Percy, that, also pretty early on, that in this moment, she's more taken in by this visual effect than in what's just happened to her. And to a large extent, it seems she lives in her own world, like Persephone Q's underworld, sort of separated even from her husband, even though she loves him. And she seems to go further into this world by taking walks at night. She starts to sleep at odd hours when Misha's not sleeping, opposite hours to him and most other people. And I found myself very interested in how I felt you created a kind of underworld yourself, and not in a fantastical way, but maybe more plainly. And when I say plainly, I mean that as a compliment, subtly. And I was wondering if you could speak to that in some way, or at least just to how you see the world in the space of the novel, especially in relationship to Percy's place in it.
Yeah. I guess you can't see me just nodding along as you're talking. Yes, that's exactly it. So also, I think I like it much better when you read than when I do from this book. But Yeah, I was very much, when I had chosen to include this allusion to the myth of Persephone, I was very much thinking not only of having a bifurcated life, living, straddling two worlds, but also kind of inhabiting kind of an underworld, in the literal sense, as you mentioned, that Percy is always up at night. She's walking around the city at night. Um, and then also in this sense of having retreated from the world around her, partly because the book is taking place in a moment of crisis, when everything feels eerie and strange and unfamiliar. When I had started the book, I was writing the first drafts just leading up to the 2016 election, and had originally chosen that setting because I thought the 9/11 setting would foreground what I thought was a very contemporary mood, and which has become contemporary once more, especially in New York, at the epicenter of this pandemic, when the world and the city again feel very unfamiliar and kind of estranged. And I think that there's also a sense in which Percy she's newly married. She got married to her husband, Misha, just after 9/11. She is, at the beginning of the book, 6 weeks pregnant. And I think there's a bit of a coming of age story here, too, and being on the cusp of transition, and Percy as being the kind of person who has maybe bought into myths of self-invention and self-madeness, and determining her own identity. Questions of identity are central to the book. And so I wonder if, in some ways, the sense that she's living in her own world, her own kind of reality that even often contradicts consensus reality, is almost a bit of a protective measure that she's taking in order to protect those myths. The idea that she can still become anyone, even as she's on the cusp of these very permanent transitions. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So you were working on the book in the fall of 2016, and then were you working on it? You were in the middle of it, so then you were working on it after that when Trump became president, for instance.
Yeah. So I think I must have started it right around, like, right at the beginning of January in 2016. So maybe at a moment when we were, remember when there were 20 Republicans on stage and having those debates. And we were sort of, Trump was not a front runner at that time, but the debates themselves still felt very eerie and charged, and there was a lot of violent rhetoric. And then as we went deeper and deeper into 2016, you really had this sense that versions of reality and truth were beginning to collide in a pretty charged way.
Yeah, that would be such an intense time to be in the middle of a book, in the middle of working on a book. Definitely. I thought a lot too about negative capability when I was reading the novel. I mean, it's something I'm sort of eternally interested in. I'm often thinking of it just in life and in writing, but with writing, kind of specifically how a writer can work with it and still kind of maintain a forward momentum. So, for instance, in your novel, the reader will never really know whether or not Percy appears, in those photographs. And Percy doesn't know herself why she pinches, Misha's nose at night when he's sleeping. And we don't know if her neighbor Harold has left his girlfriend Claire or something more sinister has happened. And there's just a lot about, and when I think about the time you were in, it makes sense, but there seems to be a lot about the unknown, the unknowable, and I'm curious, I was curious, and now I have even more thoughts about it, when you were writing the novel, how you were thinking about the unknowable and about mystery, maybe holding two ideas in the reader's mind at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, during 2016, the idea of truth or the idea of a consensus reality felt very much on trial. So I think there are two ways that I was thinking about this idea of negative capability or ambiguity and sort of resisting simple reconciliations of contradictions. And on the one hand, I think in my approach to fiction, it's something that I think a lot about too, because I think that ambiguity is still the domain of the narrative arts and of fiction in particular, and that we can still dwell in things that are irresolvable and dwell in mystery, and that there's a need, if not even a moral imperative, of being able to live with ambiguity, right? Yeah. And then on the other hand, in terms of the way that I was responding to the moment in which I was writing, it really felt that that different narratives were colliding, and that it was causing major disruptions and a kind of violence. And so that idea of not really knowing that idea of different narratives colliding and not quite knowing what is true, I think was also something that I was interested in pulling through the novel. And I guess that becomes, there are all of those examples that you mentioned, and it also becomes quite literal, that idea of realities colliding and ambiguities, and who do we believe, and who do we feel comfortable believing, questions of authority, of whose narrative carries authority. All of those questions, I think, become most foregrounded in the exhibition that is at the center of the book. And for those who aren't familiar with the plot, Percy finds out that she is pictured in an exhibition that is being staged in a gallery in Chelsea, only no one believes her when she says that she is the woman in the pictures. So she, claims to be that woman, only no one else accepts her sort of version of reality. So that kind of central contradiction of narratives. And we're not quite sure if we ever even believe Percy as well. Definitely foregrounds this idea of which narratives carry authority, and the ambiguity and different versions of reality all being asserted at once.
Yeah, I really like when Percy goes to see her ex-fiance to talk to him about this, and they look together. They kind of blow up the images, right, of the images so that they can kind of look together. And you would think that he would sort of know the answer, but it becomes this kind of investigation. It's sort of a sweet moment, I think, this investigation, between the two of them, to kind of get to the truth.
I think that's another kind of ambiguity that is there in the book, because I'm not sure. I mean, I think that Percy in her own way can be unlikable. She can be, we might not know to what extent we should or want to believe her, but the fiance who is responsible for these pictures and for the exhibition, there's a way in which we question his authority to use this picture of her, and she's nude in the photographs as well. And though you can't quite see her face, so she's difficult to identify. And in a way, that's deeply uncomfortable. And then I think you're right that in that moment when she goes to confront him and he doesn't even remember as well, there's almost something kind of sweet or conciliatory in the way that they're both trying to make sense of of the past that they seem to remember very differently.
Yeah. I think, I said earlier that the novel made me think just about what's possible, in the novel form. And a big part of that for me is the way you worked with structure in the book. And I absolutely love the digression Percy takes when she, when she does go to see her ex-fiance, and she's describing her childhood and her life to him, even sort of her life, as their relationship was ending. Um, and up until this point, like just thinking about Percy as a character, and you said, you were talking about the idea of whether or not the reader believes her or can believe her. As readers, we've been very much in her present moment with her, and in the years that just preceded it. But we don't know a lot about her, and it's not a blankness to her necessarily, but there's sort of an absence created around her character, I think. So that the diversion, that, if you want to call it a diversion that she takes into her life, when she starts talking about her life, it feels to me like it comes rushing in with all of this fullness. And I loved both that sense of absence and this fullness. And I love the feeling that I entered a different space within the same novel. It almost felt like a slightly different style of writing. I mean, not completely. And I feel like there's the transitions. There's more I want to say about transitions, but the transitions between them feel pretty seamless, and like they're speaking the parts. The novel is divided into three parts, and that I feel the parts are kind of speaking to each other in a really nice way. But yeah, all of that is just what felt really interesting to me, and it felt right that this part of the novel happens kind of towards the end. That it doesn't come in the beginning. And when we come out of this sort of, I guess what I would call new narrative space, the original narrative space is still suffused with it, kind of in a really dreamy way. And not too long after that, the novel ends. And I read the conversation you and Patty Cottrell had in The Believer, which I thought was great, by the way. But and both of you kind of refer to that part of the novel as a novella. A novella being tucked away, kind of the surprise novella in the novel, which I love thinking of it that way. And I guess I just wondered how you came to this, novella, and how it affected or changed your own ideas about the kind of novel you wrote. Or,
Yeah. Gosh, I really like just so much of the way that you're describing that. I mean, there's just so much in that really resonates with what was on my mind, and the choices that I made in investigating this structure. I think, I mean, there are a few things. So first, on a more superficial level, like I think that this is this can be an uncomfortable novel, but I like to think that there are moments when it offers some comic relief as well, that it is in its own way a comic novel. And I guess with this framed novella, or this second section of this new narrative space, I think there is a little bit of a structural joke there, and that Percy confronts her fiance and she says, "I just need 5 minutes," and then she goes on for 40 pages, and I thought there's something subtly amusing in that, but in those 40 pages we really do get her backstory, and you said there's maybe a kind of absence or a flatness to Percy beforehand, and in part, she doesn't really have memories. We learn just a little bit about the fiance who has staged this exhibition and their previous relationship, but we don't really learn anything about her life and her kind of origin story. And we get all of that information at once here. And to the extent that the book is interested in questions of identity and American approaches to that question. I was thinking of amnesia as a bit of a American state of mind. Um, and I was thinking about what happens if I have a character who, for the beginning of this book and really for 2/3 of the way, through the narrative, is not so in touch with her past, is not so historical. And then maybe part of the change that she goes through is confronting that past. And it was intentional, and I'm really it means something to me to hear that it feels that when we re-enter the main narrative mode of the novel, that we see Percy a little bit differently, and that her narrative is now suffused with the information that we know about her and that we gleaned from hearing about her past in that second part of the novel.
Yeah, I like that as well, like the fact that she asks for 5 minutes of her fiance's time and then and then goes on for 40 pages. That I found that very funny. And I also found it funny that, and this is kind of starting to speak to transitions, but that Percy is leaning against a door and crouched on a doormat, right? The entire
Right,
time.
yes. Yes. Right. I'm so glad you noticed that. Yes.
Yeah, no, I love that because, for most of us, we're on a doormat for a second, like we're walking in and out of a door. Like hardly anyone has that experience, I think, of and the fact that this novella could sort of, that's where she's placed throughout, like she's on this doormat. And it did, like just the sort of symbolism of doors. I felt some humor there, just in terms of like thresholds and sort of, these transitions. That I think is very nice. But also when we, as the readers, like when we start reading part 3, the first sentence I believe is, how far away my fiance seemed. He was all the way on the other side of the room. Just that, like, we're sort of pulled directly back into the moment, but with this sort of gulf of distance between them in the room. And like I said, she's crouched on the doormat. So yeah, it's very nice. And
Yeah.
what were you gonna say?
It's just, it was a tricky transition. It's an abrupt transition. You've been in, I think, I like your term that we've been in a different narrative space, a new narrative space for so long, that it is a very abrupt transition to kind of fall back into the main narrative mode. But I guess, Percy, to every fault of her own, can also act as a bit of a doormat of her own life. So I guess it seems, maybe a little unfair to have placed her there, but in the same way, not entirely inappropriate.
No, I think it's so fun. And I actually love the transition. I mean, I like that we're sort of, that we come right back to, as I said, like the two of them in the room, but like this gulf between them. And it really, I really did feel like the part 3 was, like I said, suffused with part 2. Like we're kind of going back to that original narrative space, but I don't feel that we completely leave part 2. And it feels like, and maybe because they're, Misha ends up, he doesn't want Percy to go with him, into the building, so like she kind of wanders on her own again, and she finds Buck. She sees Buck, and for me, it's almost like almost not like drugged feeling, but there's just some, like it's still dreamy, like there's this dreaminess in part 3, and she sees him, and I found it really interesting that it's not the very end of the novel, but pretty close to it. She kind of she runs into Buck again, who's a character who's appeared earlier in the novel, who has I guess a pretty bad sore on his nose that is hard not to look at, and it really stands out. And she kind of tricks him into going to the hospital. They first go to eat in the cafeteria, and then, before you know it, she's leaving. He's staying to take care of the sore, right? So I found that really interesting, and I was curious about, how kind of what that could mean, or how Buck, how that scene kind of made it feels significant, like it's a very pivotal or important part of the novel, like how that scene or those scenes kind of made it into the close to the ending.
Yeah, I think that is an important moment for Percy. And as we were discussing earlier, living in her own world or dissociated or in her own kind of underworld, I think an effect of that in the novel is to neglect those around her, to neglect her husband, and to not fully embrace both the intimacy that is in her life, and to have not really entered kind of relations of care with other people um, fully. And I wonder if this is one of those moments when she's finally let go of, to some extent, some of the illusions she had before about always being able to determine who she is in a way that actually makes it difficult for her to fully enter other relationships. And if she's outgrown some of those illusions by the end of the book, then there's this moment in which she's actually able to care for someone else or to help someone else in a meaningful way. And they go to the hospital and presumably Buck is able to receive the care that he needs. So
yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, she does seem different to me as a character after part 2 and part 3. And when she sees Misha at the end of the novel, there's a connection you can feel between them too.
Yeah. And I think also in part 3 and just before Percy does meet Buck in her neighborhood on the street, there's also a real sense of loss where she begins to register what keeping so much from Misha for so much of the book, what the consequences of that might be, right? So I think that's another shift in her mood and what it means to register that idea of to always assert that you can reinvent yourself, that you can determine kind of who you are on your own, is also to end up alone a little bit.
Yeah. To pivot a little bit, I was so the first time I read your writing was maybe a year ago, maybe a little more. I read a short story by you called "The Party," I think, in the Paris Review, and I really liked it, and I became interested right away in your writing, and then I read, the exhibition of Persephone Q, and I really liked that, and I felt even more interested in your writing, and I'm struck though they feel there's something that feels very different to me about. I've only read one of your short stories, but about that short story and about the exhibition of Persephone Q. Again, not like drastically different, but maybe there's something a little different stylistically or in terms of tone. And something interesting that another interesting thing that you said in your conversation with Patty, you guys talked a little bit about this idea of persona, and I think you said something like a question you ask yourself is maybe with each new piece of writing, what kind of persona are you performing? And I was curious if you feel that kind of comes into play when you write short stories versus the novel, or if it's just like any new text, that's something that kind of comes into play, or just your maybe your relationship to writing short stories and to writing the novel. And I was also curious if you're working on a collection of short stories.
Yeah. So I think that persona, I often think of the first person voice as a kind of affect a little bit, and the kind of affect that and persona that your first person narrator is trying to project to the reader, versus the person that they might actually be, or the state that they might actually be in, but that they might be trying to hide a little bit. And I feel torn because I also think that the party is very different, from the novel, and that my short stories are very different. And when I guess the novel had actually come from merging two short stories. I had one story about um, a woman who had reason to get in touch with a former fiance from her past, and another story about a woman who passes a gallery, sees a photo, and realizes that it's her, only again no one else believes her. And I'd sort of merged those two short stories. And the kind of really frenetic voice that I often have in my short stories, I wondered about sustaining that for a novel and whether a novel could sustain that. I'm sure I could be very much disproved by someone like Beckett, or but I felt like I had to um, recalibrate. And I guess it's when I was writing a longer form narrative. But that makes me think again about this question of persona. Um, and was I, adjusting the kind of persona, or was I adjusting sort of the like urgency of someone's denial, I guess, or the kind of frenetic energy that they bring to the telling. And I have been continuing to write short stories. I'm hoping that they accrue into a collection, but I'm kind of not pursuing that as intentionally, in a way, because I feel like ideas for short stories sort of they arrive when they do. I have to wait for them a little bit. So I guess I'm waiting for enough to arrive that they might that maybe they would wind up in a collection. But
yeah, it's I wrote, I pretty much only wrote short stories, and then I wrote a novel, and the idea of writing a novel felt impossible, and now it feels hard to think of writing short stories. And
oh, I feel that way too.
yeah, it's I think it's hard to start things over again and again. With the short stories, like there's something nice about creating a world of something and then just staying in it for a while.
Yeah. I think there is more of a sense of, beginnings are hard, and they're very difficult in novels too. But I guess you are working with the same beginning for a while.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so you don't have to do it again and again. And so are you working on another novel now?
I am, yeah. And I guess we've been talking about persona and first person voice, and I've been writing pretty exclusively in third person recently, and so I've been working in that mode on a new manuscript. Yeah.
That's exciting.
It is. Yeah, it feels different. I guess I think there's so many reasons you why you sit down to write the novel that you do, but I do like to have, one of those reasons for me is I do like to have a kind of formal problem, or that I'm interested in. And I guess I was interested in working in third, and kind of teaching myself that mode.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Are you, just how does writing feel to you now? Just in this time of the coronavirus and all the uncertainty it holds, and as you said, you're in New York in an epicenter of this. Have you been able to work on your novel? Do you feel like the time is, if you are working on it, do you feel like this time is changing anything in it, or just yeah, how is that space for you right now?
Yeah, as soon as you asked if I was working on something else, that really came to mind. I think that one way that I mean, New York does feel very eerie right now. It feels very sad. I think you can hear some sirens on the call right now. I tend to go for a walk after dark when the streets tend to be a little bit emptier, and you just see so many fire trucks, so many ambulances, and it's really kind of heartbreaking. And at the same time, I feel like one way that I have been coping is by writing a little bit manically. And often I found that I end up writing very late at night when it feels like the news turns off and the world turns off for a little while. The world stops collapsing for a few hours, or it becomes easier to pretend. So I have been able to work, but I'm writing much later than I usually do, in part because those are the only hours when I feel like I can focus a little bit. But what about you? And what's it like writing in LA right now, or are you able to write?
I have been writing some short things that I've had deadlines for. I've definitely found focus hard. It's getting a little easier. I was feeling pretty anxious in the beginning, of all of this, in the first few weeks especially. I'm not quite as anxious as I was. I think I was just sort of shocked, by what was happening, and writing then felt sort of impossible. But now I've just been in this house for, I guess, like over a month now.
Right.
I rarely get out, and I've not been, I have a book that I'm trying to finish, and so I need to pick that book up and finish it. But I think I feel ready to do that. But it's, yeah, it's hard. It's a hard time, obviously.
It is hard, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm definitely thinking of everyone in New York, because I have some friends there. But yeah, I'm thinking of all of you guys there. And have you been? We've talked a little bit about some of the reading we're doing. You've mentioned some books you've been reading that are in the realm of batshit crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
Is
Right.
that intentional because of the time we're in, or have you? It's just more of a coincidence.
Maybe a little bit. Yeah, I had mentioned that I was finishing The Idiot right when this started, and we had said, that is qualifies in the maybe batshit genre in some ways. And I had been interested in The Idiot also because it's a novel about illness in its own way. Ignorance and illness were kind of on my mind. And since then, I was reading Our Lady of the Flowers by Jean Genet. And because a novel has a lot of masturbation scenes and was written while someone was in prison and on brown paper bags, because that's the only paper he had, seemed like an appropriate quarantine read.
Yeah.
And I finally got around to Kathleen Collins's short story collection, Whatever Happened to Interracial Love, which is just as good as everyone has said it is. So that's what I've been reading lately. What about you?
I am currently reading The Door by Magda, I probably mispronounce her last name, Sabo. Have you read that?
That's one of my favorite books. Yeah.
Is it? Okay.
I love her work. I really love her work. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been meaning to read this book for a long time. I don't know why it's taken me so long, but I love it so far.
Yeah.
It has its own batshit elements to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. She does rage very well. It's got a fairy tale quality, and then also this kind of pure rage that becomes really wonderful when captured in a small domestic space, as it is in that book.
Yeah.
I'm envious that you're reading it for the first time.
I know, it's so nice to read an amazing book for the first time.
Yeah, it really is. So, and so I guess, neither of us are real podcast hosts here, but we discussed, trying to do some ads, like genuine podcast hosts, but maybe ads for local organizations who are helping out during this crisis. I wonder if we could, before we sign off, give a little shout out to some of those organizations.
Yeah, that I would love to.
So I wanted to mention City Harvest here in New York, which is a food collection organization. They go around to restaurants and collect food that would otherwise go to waste, which is especially important right now. And they redistribute that food to those in need and to food banks around the city. So you can donate to City Harvest at cityharvest.org. And I also wanted to draw attention to some organizations that are raising funds to provide bail for prisoners who are currently being held in jails around the country, and especially in New York, where there are incredibly high rates of COVID infection, and prisoners are at extremely high risk. And two organizations that are working in that space that could use your help are the Bail Project, which is a national organization that works to provide bail for prisoners, and that you can reach them at bailproject.org. And there's a local organization that's working in particular with New York prisons, where there's an incredibly high rate of infection, and that's covidbailout.org. So again, that's cityharvest.org and bailproject.org. And for providing bail for prisoners, specifically in New York, there's covidbailout.org.
And I just wanted to talk for a second about, so there's a website called This Long Century. It's a really wonderful project. It's sort of an archive of artifacts by writers, artists, filmmakers, musicians. This month in April, there are 30 short films and videos on the website. And it's just, there are two programs in the series called Outside and Inside. And basically the filmmakers have donated donated their films, and This Long Century is asking that if you watch the films, you then donate to one of 5 organizations, including Feeding America, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, Navajo and Hopi Families COVID-19 Relief Fund. So these are all US-based nonprofits and relief funds to help people who are in need right now. And it does occur to me, though, now because it's mid-April, all these films, and I started watching some of them the other night, they're wonderful. They're going to be up through the month of April, but it's occurring to me that I don't know exactly when this podcast will air. I don't know if April will be over.
Right.
Yeah, I just thought of that. So if it is still April when you are listening to this, please go to thislongcentury.com and you can watch these wonderful films and donate to these organizations. If it's no longer April, I don't know, maybe somehow they'll still be up. And if they're not, then you could donate to Feeding America, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, Navajo and Hopi Families COVID-19 Relief Fund, the Ali Forney Center, those organizations.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. Those sound fantastic. I will definitely be watching.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me, Amina, and for these fantastic questions. I guess these have been some strange and, often dark days, but this was a really wonderful respite. I'm so glad to have the chance to talk.
Me too. Yeah, thank you so much for talking with me. And I was very sad that we couldn't talk at Skylight, and we couldn't be at Skylight together. But this is very nice. I'm glad that Skylight is doing this podcast series, and I'm glad we had a chance to talk about your amazing novel. I wish you the best with it.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you to Skylight for hosting us virtually. So don't forget to order Indelicacy from Skylight if you haven't, or your other quarantine reading as well. So be well, Amina, and have a good night.
You too. Bye, Jessi.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.